At 18, Mara Bennett buried her father and learned that the Wyoming horse ranch she had grown up on was gone. Her Uncle Cal told her it had been sold to cover her father's debts, and there was nothing left for her. Not the house, not the horses, not even an acre of the land her family had worked for generations. But something about his story didn't make sense. With almost no money and nowhere else to go, Mara spent $50 of what little she had left just to get a ride back to the ranch and see it one final time. Cal called it a waste. Others told her there was no point going back to land that no longer belonged to her. Then a Wyoming blizzard rolled in. A section of fence collapsed, and Mara's old border collie, Blue, suddenly disappeared into the snow. She followed his tracks beyond the northern pasture, over a ridge she rarely crossed, until Blue stopped beside a barn hidden behind dead cottonwoods. A barn Mara had never seen in 18 years. Inside were 6 old saddles, and beneath one of them was something her uncle desperately needed her never to find. But before we discover what Mara found, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are. And if you enjoy stories about family secrets, second chances, and forgotten legacies, subscribe to the channel and join us for the journey ahead. The morning after Eli Bennett's funeral, Mara sat at the kitchen table where her father had taught her to do long division, sharpen a pocket knife, and recognize when a horse was frightened rather than stubborn. Across from her, Uncle Cal placed a thin folder on the scarred pine boards and pushed it toward her. "You need to understand what you're looking at," he said. Mara looked at the papers without touching them. Through the kitchen window, the Wyoming sky was colorless, and frost silvered the pasture beyond the house. Yesterday, that pasture had been crowded with trucks belonging to neighbors who had come to bury her father. Today, there was only wind. Blue. Her father's 9-year-old border collie lay beneath Mara's chair with his chin across her boot. "Just tell me," she said. Cal rubbed a hand over his face. At 46, he looked enough like Eli around the eyes that Mara sometimes had to look away. "Your dad owed money. More than you knew. Feed, equipment, repairs. The ranch couldn't carry it anymore." Mara stared at him. So it was sold." The words seemed too small for what they meant. Mara looked through the window again. At the fence her father had repaired every spring, and the barn where she had learned to saddle her first pony. The whole ranch, yes, when Cal hesitated, a few weeks ago. Blue lifted his head as if he had heard something outside. Mara put one hand against his neck. "Dad never told me." "Eli didn't tell you a lot of things." Cal's voice softened. "He was trying to protect you." Mara finally opened the folder. She saw numbers, photocopies, signatures, words she barely understood. At 18, she knew how to reset a thrown horseshoe in an emergency and how to keep a water trough from freezing at 10 below. But deeds and liens might as well have been another language. What did Dad leave me? Cal looked toward the window. "Nothing worth taking." Mara swallowed. "Nothing." "There's some personal stuff. Clothes, photographs, whatever's in your room, but the ranch had debts against it." She waited for him to mention the horses. He didn't. "Where am I supposed to go? We'll figure something out." Cal's mouth tightened. "Don't start." "Mara," she pushed back from the table. Blue immediately stood with her. Her father had been dead 4 days, and already the house felt borrowed. Upstairs, Mara opened the old duffel bag beneath her bed and began packing. Jeans, 2 sweaters, socks, the framed photograph of her mother holding her as a baby. She left trophies and school notebooks behind. There was no room for a childhood when everything she owned had to fit into one bag. In her father's bedroom, his work jacket still hung behind the door. Mara touched the sleeve and remembered the last argument they had had in this house. She had told him she wanted to leave Wyoming after graduation. He had asked what was so terrible about the life they had built here. Angry, 18, desperate to make him understand, she had said, "I don't want this place to become my whole life." She would have given anything now to take the sentence back. Mara turned away and noticed one of Eli's leather work gloves on the dresser. Its mate was missing. She folded the glove and put it in her bag. Then she opened the bottom desk drawer. Empty. She checked the next one, pens, veterinary receipts, an old flashlight. But the thick envelope where Eli kept property papers was gone. Mara remembered him pulling documents from it when taxes were due. Looking for something? Cal stood in the doorway. "Dad's ranch papers. I handled them. Where are they?" "With everything else related to the sale. Can I see them?" "There's nothing in there that changes anything." He stepped aside. "Come on. We should go before the road freezes tonight." Outside, Cal opened his pickup. Mara threw her duffel into the bed. But Blue planted himself beside the porch. "Blue." The dog stared toward the pastures. Mara whistled. Nothing. Cal sighed. "Leave him. I'll come back for him." "No." Mara walked over, crouched, and took Blue's face between her hands. "Come on, boy." This time he followed her, reluctantly, and climbed into the truck. As Cal drove away, Mara twisted around to watch the ranch shrink behind them. Near the equipment shed sat a stack of new fence posts, still bound with orange straps. She frowned. "When did Dad buy those?" Cal glanced in the mirror. "What? The fence posts?" "I don't know. Mara did. She had been with Eli when he ordered them. He had complained about lumber prices all the way home. The delivery had been scheduled for the week before his death." She looked down at the folder still resting on her knees. "You said he sold the ranch a few weeks ago?" "That's right." How many Cal kept his eyes on the road? 3, maybe. Mara calculated automatically. "Dad ordered those posts after that." Cal shrugged. "Your father did things that didn't make sense. But Eli Bennett had never wasted money on fencing land he didn't own. Not when money was supposedly tight enough to cost him everything." Mara opened the folder again. "Who bought it?" Cal's hands tightened around the steering wheel. For several seconds there was only the hum of tires against frozen pavement. Mara looked at him. "Uncle Cal, who bought our ranch?" He waited just a little too long before answering. And in that silence, Mara understood something more clearly than anything printed in the papers on her lap. Her uncle had just lied to her. By noon the next day, Mara had made up her mind she needed to see Bennett Ranch one more time. Cal had taken her to stay in town, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stack of new fence posts beside the equipment shed, and remembered the silence before he answered her question about the buyer. She had little money and no car of her own, and the ranch sat more than 30 miles from town. Finally, Mara called a family acquaintance who was driving north that afternoon. He could take her as far as the ranch road, but the detour would cost him time and fuel. Mara opened her wallet and counted what remained. "I can give you $50 for gas." It hurt to say it. $50 mattered now. Still, when the truck stopped beside the ranch gate 2 hours later, she handed over the bills without regret. Blue jumped down after her. "I'll find a way back," Mara said when the driver asked if she was sure. The truck disappeared down the road, leaving her in a silence broken only by wind moving through dry grass. Mara stood at the gate. If Cal was telling the truth, she was trespassing on someone else's property. Yet nothing looked sold. There was no sold sign. No unfamiliar truck beside the house. No new lock on the gate. Even the chain hung exactly as Eli had always left it. Mara opened it with the same key she had carried since she was 14. "Just one last look," she told Blue. The dog trotted ahead as if they had never left. The emptiness became stranger as Mara approached the buildings. A ranch, supposedly sold 3 weeks earlier, still looked like her father had walked away yesterday. Feed sacks were stacked inside the main barn. Eli's battered wheelbarrow leaned against a stall. Several horses remained in the pasture, lifting their heads when they saw her. Mara recognized every one. She rubbed the gray mare nearest the gate between the eyes. "Why are you still here?" The mare breathed warmly against her palm. Mara entered the tack room. The smell of leather struck her with such force that for a moment she could hear her father telling her to put equipment back where it belonged. She ran her fingers over bridles, ropes, rushes. Then she stopped. 6 hooks along the far wall were empty. Mara stepped closer. One had held June Bennett's old saddle, dark brown leather with a worn silver concho. Her grandmother had died years ago, but Eli had refused to sell it. 5 other older saddles had hung beside it. All 6 were gone. Mara checked the storage corner, although she knew they would not be there. Dad wouldn't sell those. Blue stood in the doorway instead of following her inside. He was staring north. "What is it?" His ears remained forward. Mara stepped outside. Clouds had thickened over the mountains. The forecast that morning had warned of snow by evening, but the western sky looked worse than she expected. Her phone showed a weather alert. Conditions deteriorating faster than predicted. She needed to leave. Mara called the acquaintance who had dropped her off. No answer. She tried again, then Cal. His voice came sharp the moment he realized where she was. "You went back? I wanted to see it. I told you it isn't yours anymore. Then why are Dad's horses still here?" Silence. Arrangements are being made. "And who bought it? We already discussed this." "No, you avoided it. Mara, listen to me. Get back to town." "How? I don't care. Call someone." Wind hissed through the phone. Mara looked toward the tack room. 6 saddles are missing. Cal's tone changed. "What saddles, Grandma June's?" "The old ones Dad kept. Probably moved them. Where, I don't know." His patience broke. "Stop digging through things that don't belong to you. It isn't yours anymore. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The call ended. Mara stared at the screen. Blue gave a low whine. "Yeah," she whispered. "I heard it too." She called 2 more people. One was working cattle. The other refused to drive out with the storm coming. Mara considered walking toward the highway, but 30 miles in worsening weather was impossible. She went to the house for warmer gloves and was pulling on Eli's old coat when she heard horses screaming. Mara ran outside. 3 animals were galloping along the northern pasture. One section of fence leaned outward at a dangerous angle. The top wire had snapped, and several posts were down. The new posts beside the shed suddenly made sense. Eli had known this stretch needed repair. Damn it! If the fence failed completely, the horses could scatter into open country before the storm. Mara grabbed fencing pliers, wire, and 2 posts. The first flakes were already falling when she reached the damaged section. She worked quickly, driving one post into hard ground and pulling loose wire away from a mare's legs. Blue circled the horses, keeping them back without being told. "Easy, Blue, easy." Wind shoved snow sideways across the pasture. Mara secured one wire, then another. The fence would not survive a serious storm, but it might hold until morning. A loud crack came from farther north. Another post fell. 2 horses bolted toward the opening. Mara ran, waving her arms. "Hey, back, back!" Blue shot past her and turned the first horse. Mara caught the second by its halter and fought it around as snow stung her face. Together they pushed both animals toward the barn. Mara bent over, breathing hard. "Good boy. No Blue." She straightened. Blue fresh paw prints crossed the broken fence. Beyond it lay the northern pasture, rising toward a ridge that disappeared into blowing white. Mara whistled. Blue, for 1 second she saw him, a dark shape moving through the snow. Blue. "Come back." He stopped near the top of the ridge and looked over his shoulder at her. Then, instead of returning, the old dog turned north and vanished over the other side. Mara stared after him as snow began filling his tracks. She could leave the ranch. She could find shelter and wait for daylight. But Blue had been her father's shadow for 9 years, and something beyond that ridge had made him run into a Wyoming blizzard without hesitation. Mara tightened Eli's coat around herself, climbed through the broken fence, and followed. Mara nearly lost Blue's tracks before she reached the top of the ridge. Snow swept sideways across the open ground, filling each paw print almost as quickly as she found it. She pulled Eli's coat tighter around her and kept moving. The wind swallowed her voice. For several frightening seconds, there was nothing ahead except white sky and pale grass disappearing beneath snow. Then she saw him below her. Blue was descending the far side of the ridge toward a stand of dead cottonwoods. Mara stopped. She knew the northern pasture, but she rarely crossed this ridge. There had never been a reason. The ground beyond it dropped into a shallow depression screened by trees and brush. Blue disappeared among the trunks. Blue Mara followed, sliding twice on the steep ground. The wind weakened as she entered the depression. She wiped snow from her eyelashes and saw a dark shape between the cottonwoods. At first, she thought it was another cluster of trees. Then the shape resolved into a roof. Mara stood perfectly still. A barn sat beneath the ridge. It was smaller than the main horse barn, built from weathered timber darkened almost black with age. Dead branches pressed against one wall, and brush had grown thick around the southern side. From the ranch buildings, the ridge concealed it completely. Mara stared at it, confused by the impossible familiarity of the place. She had lived on Bennett Ranch for most of 18 years. She had ridden miles of fence with her father, yet she had never stood here. Blue ran directly to a narrow side door and scratched once. "How do you know this place?" Mara whispered. The dog looked at her impatiently. The main doors were chained, but Blue's door had a simple wooden latch. Mara lifted it. The hinges protested as she pushed inside. Blue slipped past her immediately. Mara followed and closed the door against the storm. The sudden quiet made her ears ring. Weak gray light entered through 2 dusty windows. She smelled timber, leather, hay, and something sharper. Kerosene. "Dad!" The word escaped before she could stop it. No answer came. Mara found a lantern hanging from a nail. When she lifted it, she noticed fuel inside. The wick was dark from recent use, not buried beneath years of dust. A box of matches sat beside it. She struck one and lit the lantern. Warm light spread across the barn. 6 saddles rested on wooden racks along the far wall. Mara forgot the storm. She walked toward them slowly. June Bennett's saddle was first. The worn silver concho caught the lantern light. Beside it were the other 5 missing saddles from the tack room. Each had been wrapped in canvas, then uncovered and arranged carefully. "They weren't stolen," Mara said. Blue wandered deeper into the barn, nose working along the floor. Mara touched June's saddle. The leather was conditioned. Someone had cared for it recently. She looked around again. A folded horse blanket lay on a shelf. It was clean. A metal cup sat beside the lantern, near the back wall. Muddy boot prints had dried on the floor. Mara knew the shape of those boots. She had seen them beside the kitchen door every night of her childhood. Eli had been here, not years ago, recently. She sank onto an overturned bucket. Her father had maintained a hidden barn without ever mentioning it to her. The discovery should have made her angry. Instead, it hurt. She thought of his missing papers, Cal's evasions, the fence posts ordered after the supposed sale. Everything seemed to point somewhere, but she could not yet see where. Blue nudged her knee. "What was he doing out here?" Mara asked. Blue moved toward the saddles. Mara lifted the canvas covering the second one. Beneath its stirrup leather, faint letters had been stamped into the wood of the rack. E.B. Eli Bennett. The next rack carried J.B. June Bennett. Mara checked another. 2 initials she did not recognize. Then she reached the last saddle. It was older than hers, with dark leather and a narrow horn polished smooth by decades of use. On the rack beneath it were 2 letters, M.B. Mara stared. She touched them with one finger. That can't be mine. The saddle was plainly older than she was. Maybe the initials belonged to another Bennett. They, seeing her own initials inside a barn her father had kept secret, tightened something in her chest. A hard gust struck the building. The doors rattled. Mara looked toward the windows. Snow had thickened until the trees outside were fading. Whatever this place meant, she could not investigate it while freezing. She checked her phone. No signal. The battery was already low. Headlights suddenly appeared through the trees. Mara grabbed the lantern and stepped toward the door. An engine stopped outside. A moment later, someone pounded twice. Mara. She recognized the voice. Noah. Noah Hale pushed inside, carrying a flashlight, snow covering the shoulders of his coat. At 20, he was taller than Mara remembered from the last time they had spoken for more than a few minutes. His family ran cattle on neighboring land. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded. "Looking for Blue." "In this?" He pointed toward the storm. "I saw a vehicle by the Bennett place earlier. When it was still there after the weather turned, I came over." His irritation faded as he studied her face. "Are you okay?" "I found him." Blue wagged his tail once. Noah looked around the barn, then at the saddles. Mara expected confusion. Instead, he said, "At least you found shelter." Mara watched him. "You know this barn?" Noah paused. "Of course. I don't." That surprised him. "Your dad never brought you here." Mara shook her head. "I didn't know it existed until 10 minutes ago." Noah glanced toward the racks. "Eli came up here all the time." The statement landed harder than Mara expected. "How do you know I saw him?" "Sometimes when we were checking our north fence." Another gust slammed against the building. Noah went to the doors and examined the chain. "We're not driving anywhere tonight. The road's already disappearing. We should secure this place before the wind gets worse." Mara wanted answers, but the barn shook again. Together they checked the doors and wedged an old timber against the main entrance. Noah stuffed folded burlap into a gap near one hinge while Mara checked the windows. The work steadied her. Problems she could touch were easier than questions she couldn't answer. When they finished, Noah tested the door. "That'll hold." "You're sure, more sure than I am, about getting my truck back over that ridge tonight?" Blue suddenly began scratching at the floor. "Blue, stop!" He ignored her. He had gone behind an old workbench near the rear wall and was pawing furiously at the boards beneath it. Mara approached. "What did you find now?" Blue squeezed his nose between the bench and wall and whined. Noah lifted one end. "Help me!" They dragged the heavy bench sideways. Dust streaked the floor where it had stood. Behind it was a rectangular wooden panel fitted into the wall. Unlike the surrounding boards, its edges were clean. Mara raised the lantern. Something had been written across the panel in pencil. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had seen it on birthday cards, feed lists, school permission slips, and notes left beside her breakfast. Her father's handwriting. 2 words. For Mara. Mara did not touch the panel at first. Her father's penciled words seemed more alive than anything else in the barn. For Mara. She traced the F with one gloved fingertip, half expecting the graphite to smear. "He knew you'd find this," Noah said quietly, "or hoped I would." Mara found a small wooden catch along the panel's lower edge. It resisted, swollen by years of cold, until Noah steadied the surrounding boards and she pulled harder. The panel opened with a dry crack. Inside sat a canvas-wrapped bundle. Mara carried it to the workbench and unfolded the cloth. There was no money, no jewelry, nothing that looked valuable enough to explain Cal's lies. Instead, she found photographs, envelopes, folded maps, horse records, old receipts, and a leather-bound notebook. "Peter," Noah said. "Dad hid paper." Mara picked up the first photograph. A young woman stood beside a horse in front of the very barn sheltering them. Her hair was tied beneath a scarf, one hand resting confidently on the saddle horn. Mara recognized her grandmother June from photographs in the farmhouse, though here she could not have been much older than Mara. She turned the picture over. In faded blue ink were the words, "North Barn, never part with this ground." Mara read them twice. North Barn. "Guess now we know what they called it," Noah said. Mara looked around. "Why hide it from me?" Noah didn't answer. She sorted through the bundle. Several envelopes contained breeding records going back decades. Others held receipts for fencing, veterinary work, hay, and property taxes. None immediately explained why Eli had hidden them. Then Mara found an envelope with her name written across it. Not for Mara this time, just Mara. Her hands began to shake. She knew the handwriting. "Open it," Noah said. Mara slid a finger beneath the flap. Inside was a single sheet. She unfolded it beneath the lantern. "Mara, if you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to explain." She stopped, the sentence blurred. "What does it say?" Noah asked. Mara handed him the page because she could not make herself read it aloud. He scanned it, then turned it over. Blank. "That's all. There should be more." Mara searched the envelope. Empty. She went through the canvas bundle faster, lifting photographs and opening folders. Nothing. He wouldn't write that and stop. Maybe the rest is somewhere else, where... Her voice came sharper than she intended. Noah set the page down carefully. "I don't know." Mara pressed both hands against the workbench. The last real conversation she had shared with her father had ended with her telling him she didn't want the ranch to become her whole life. Now he had left an explanation, and even that had been taken away before she could hear it. Blue leaned against her leg. She rested one hand on his head until her breathing steadied. Then she noticed a folded sheet beneath the leather notebook. It was larger than the others. She opened it across the workbench. A survey map. The Bennett name appeared across the top, and familiar landmarks emerged beneath lines and measurements. The county road, creek, farmhouse, main barn, western pasture. But the boundaries looked wrong. "Come here." Noah moved beside her. Mara took the folder Cal had given her from inside Eli's coat. She had brought it because she no longer trusted leaving it behind. One photocopied property diagram showed Bennett Ranch enclosed by a single heavy boundary. Eli's survey showed several parcels, Most importantly, the land north of the farmhouse was outlined separately. North Parcel. Noah read. Mara placed her finger on it. The hidden barn sat within that boundary. Cal's map doesn't show this. Could be an older survey. Then why was Dad keeping it here? Before Noah could answer, a violent gust struck the barn. Something outside snapped. Blue barked. They both turned toward the doors. A second crack followed. Farther downhill, Mara knew the sound. Fence post. She grabbed the lantern. Noah blocked her path. It's getting worse. The horses are already pushing that north fence. Mara, if another section goes, they can reach the ravine. That ended the argument. They pulled scarves over their faces and stepped into the storm. Snow reached Mara's ankles, and visibility had collapsed to a few dozen yards. They followed the slope toward the pasture, Blue close behind. The damaged fence appeared suddenly through the white. Another post had fallen, dragging wire low enough for a horse to cross. Three shapes moved nervously beyond it. "Keep them back," Mara shouted. Noah took Blue and circled toward the horses, while Mara attacked the fence. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves as she threaded wire around a standing post. The wind kept stealing her balance. One mare approached the opening. Blue moved forward at Noah's command, turning her without panic. Mara pulled the wire tight. It would not hold. "Need another anchor," Noah shouted. Mara spotted a surviving corner post and dragged the loose wire toward it. Together they tightened the temporary line until the gap narrowed. A horse struck it once with its chest, backed away, then followed the others downhill. "That's the best we're getting tonight," Noah said. Mara wanted to argue, but she could barely feel her hands. They returned to the hidden barn. Inside, Noah secured the door while Mara stood near the lantern, flexing painful fingers. "Your dad asked me something last summer," Noah said. Mara looked up. "What?" He hesitated. "We were fixing a water line near our boundary. Out of nowhere he asked, 'If Mara ever comes back, will you help her?'" Mara stared at him. "Comes back?" "That's what he said. But I hadn't left yet." "I know. What did you tell him I said yes?" Mara looked down at the unfinished letter. She had believed Eli heard her say she wanted to leave and understood only rejection. Yet some time afterward, he had spoken as if her leaving were already accepted and her returning still possible. She carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. Then she returned to the survey. There were handwritten notes along the margins, some faded nearly beyond recognition. She moved the lantern closer. Parcel numbers, fence measurements, dates. One number beside the north parcel had been underlined twice. Mara searched the other papers until she found the same number on an old property receipt. "This is separate," she said. "From what, I don't know yet." She turned the survey toward the light. At the bottom of the north parcel boundary, beneath a line of measurements, Eli had written something in pencil. Mara leaned closer. The first words were faint, but readable. She felt Noah move beside her. Neither spoke. In her father's handwriting were 5 words that made the folder Cal had given her suddenly feel much heavier in her pocket. "Cal cannot sell this." By late morning, the worst of the storm had moved east, leaving Bennett Ranch buried beneath fresh snow and the northern road barely passable. Noah's truck made it back over the ridge only because he drove slowly, and Mara walked ahead twice to clear branches from the track. She carried Eli's survey map inside her coat, protected beneath the folder Cal had given her. The penciled words stayed in her mind the entire drive to town. "Cal cannot sell this." Noah dropped her near Calder Feed and Supply, a narrow building with a faded red sign and sacks of grain stacked beneath the front awning. "You sure about this?" he asked. Mara nodded. "Ruth knew Grandma June better than almost anyone. Call me if you need a ride back." "I will." He looked like he wanted to say something else, then only added, "Keep the map with you." Mara closed the truck door. Blue followed her into the store. Ruth Calder was behind the counter, writing figures in a ledger. At 62, she wore her gray hair in a loose braid and reading glasses low on her nose. She looked up, saw Mara, and immediately set down her pen. "Honey." Mara hated how quickly that one word almost broke her. Ruth came around the counter and hugged her. "I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to speak to you properly after the funeral." "It's okay." Ruth stepped back and studied her face. "You look like you slept in a barn." "I did." That earned a puzzled look. Mara placed the photograph of June on the counter. Ruth's expression changed instantly. "Where did you get this?" "You recognize it?" Ruth picked it up carefully. "That's June. Lord. She must have been 19, maybe 20. Her thumb stopped beneath the handwritten note on the back. "North Barn, never part with this ground." Ruth looked at Mara. "You found the old North Barn? You knew about it?" "Of course. Your grandmother practically lived there when she was young." Mara felt the same frustration she had felt when Noah recognized the barn. Why did everyone know about this place except me? Everyone didn't. Ruth lowered her voice. Most people forgot it was there. Your father stopped using it for horses years ago. He didn't stop using it. Mara showed her the lantern. Receipts and survey map explaining only what she had discovered. She avoided guessing. When Ruth saw the separate outline marked North Parcel, she became very still. "I remember June arguing about this land." "With who?" "Family mostly, after your grandfather died. There were questions about what would happen to different sections of the ranch. June was stubborn about the northern ground." Ruth tapped the map. "She said this part was never to be folded into anything someone else could bargain away. Who owned it, I don't know." Ruth shook her head. "Not for certain. June handled things privately." Mara pulled out Cal's diagram and laid the two maps side by side. "Cal's copy shows the ranch as one piece." "That doesn't prove his is wrong." "No, but Dad wrote this." Mara pointed to the note. "Cal cannot sell this." Ruth read it without speaking. Then she reached beneath the counter for her coat. "County office. Now, unless you'd rather sit here guessing." The property records office occupied one end of the county building. Some newer documents could be searched on a public terminal, but the older Bennett records were incomplete. Mara typed the parcel number from Eli's survey. A result appeared. Then another, both referencing older documents that were not fully digitized. She opened scanned index pages, tracing transfers and tax descriptions she barely understood. Ruth helped her compare dates. "There," Mara said. The North Parcel number appeared again. It had its own chain of references, separate from the larger acreage around it. "So Dad was right." "It proves the parcel existed separately." Ruth cautioned. "Not who owns it now." Mara searched farther. One record pointed to an older deed book available only as an archived image. Before she could open it, a voice behind her said, "What are you doing?" Mara turned. Cal stood several feet away, snow melting from the shoulders of his coat. He looked first at her, then at Ruth, then at the survey map on the desk. His face hardened. "I asked you a question." Mara closed her hand over the map. "Looking up property records?" "Why? Because you won't answer me." Cal walked closer. "This is exactly what I told you not to do." "You told me not to go back to land you said was sold." "It was sold." "Then explain the North Parcel." Something flickered across his expression. Small, but unmistakable. Mara saw it. Ruth saw it too. "What North Parcel?" Cal asked. Mara almost laughed. "The one Dad said you couldn't sell?" Cal's jaw tightened. "Where did you get that? Why does it matter? Because you're 18 and you don't understand half the paperwork you're looking at." Then explain it, not here. Here is fine. Cal glanced around the quiet office. Give me whatever you took from that barn. Mara stopped breathing for a second. Ruth slowly turned toward him. Mara said, What barn? Cal's eyes narrowed. Too late. You knew, Mara. I never told you I found a barn. I know the property. Yesterday, you acted like you didn't know where those saddles went. I said I didn't know where Eli moved them. But now you know exactly where I found things. Cal lowered his voice. Those papers are old. Some may be outdated. They don't change the sale. Then why do you want them? Because you're making a mess out of something already settled. Mara stepped back when he reached toward the map. Don't! Cal froze. Ruth moved beside Mara, not touching her, but close enough that she was no longer standing alone. Maybe the girl deserves to see what was settled, Ruth said. Cal looked at her sharply. This is family business. Then start treating her like family. For a moment, no one spoke. Cal exhaled through his nose. Fine. Waste your time, but when you find out none of this changes anything, don't say I didn't warn you. He walked away. Mara watched until the door closed behind him. Her hands were shaking. He knew about the barn, she said. Ruth nodded. Yes. They returned to the terminal. The archived deed image finally loaded. Faint and uneven, Mara leaned close to the screen. Ruth took out her glasses and traced the old, typed lines with one finger. Most of the legal language meant nothing to Mara, but near the bottom was an ownership entry connected to the north parcel. Ruth stopped moving. What Mara asked, Ruth enlarged the image. The letters sharpened enough to read. She pointed to the line. There. Mara followed her finger. Beside the parcel description were two words that changed the shape of everything she thought she knew about Bennett Ranch. Owner June Bennett. The next morning, Mara returned to the hidden barn with the photograph of June tucked inside her coat and the words Owner June Bennett still echoing in her mind. Snow lay deep in the depression, but the storm had passed, leaving the Wyoming sky painfully clear. Blue reached the side door before she did and waited there, tail moving once. Mara lifted the latch and stepped inside. The barn felt different now. Not less mysterious exactly, but less like a place she had accidentally entered, and more like a room someone had been waiting for her to understand. She lit Eli's lantern and carried it to the row of saddles. 6 of them. 6 sets of initials. 6 pieces of a family history she had grown up beside, without ever being told how much they mattered. She began with June's. J.B. was stamped into the rack beneath it. The leather was dark with age, but supple from care. Mara ran her fingers over the horn, imagining her grandmother in the photograph, young and straight-backed, one boot in the stirrup. Ruth had known June as stubborn. The county record had named her as owner. The note on the photograph had said, "Never part with this ground for the first time." Mara wondered whether everyone had remembered June as somebody's wife and somebody's mother, because that was easier than remembering she might have been the person holding the ranch together. Blue sniffed along the base of the racks. "You knew all this, didn't you?" Mara murmured. He looked at her and sneezed. She almost smiled. One by one, Mara studied the saddles. E.B. for Eli, J.B. for June, 2 sets of initials she still could not place. Another saddle showed years of heavy use, its stirrup leather stretched thin. The last rack bore M.B., the initials that had startled her on the night of the storm. She still had no answer for those. Not yet. She forced herself not to chase every question at once. The approved clue in front of her was June. She returned to June's saddle and lifted it from the rack. It was heavier than she expected. Beneath it, tucked flat against the wood, was a narrow leather-bound ledger she had not noticed before. Mara pulled it free. Dust marked the edges, but the cover had been handled recently. Her father again. She sat on the workbench and opened it. The first pages were filled with dates, horse names, breeding notes, feed costs, and weather observations. June's handwriting was compact and firm. February 12, mare foaled early, survived. April 3, south fence washed out. June 19, declined Wilson offer for north ground. Mara stopped. She read the line again. Declined Wilson offer for north ground. Several pages later, another note appeared. August 7. Cal's father still believes North Acreage should be joined with the rest. Told him no. Mara's finger hovered over the sentence. It was old enough to refer to a generation before the present dispute, but the argument itself sounded painfully familiar. She kept reading. Over the years, June recorded offers, repairs, grazing agreements, and repeated references to maintaining the northern acreage separately. Not because it was the most profitable section, not because it held anything magical, because, according to one entry, the spring, the house ground, and the horse pasture must remain protected if the rest ever has to be divided. Mara looked up sharply. The ranch had always seemed to her like one uninterrupted place. June had seen it differently. She had identified a core worth protecting. Mara turned more pages. Another line made her pause. A ranch is not land alone. It is water, shelter, animals, memory, and the right person having enough sense not to trade all five for cash. Mara let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. You really were stubborn. Blue rested his chin on her knee. Mara thought of her own mother, whose memories came mostly from photographs. Then of June, then of herself. For years, when people in town spoke about Bennett Ranch, they spoke about Bennett men, her grandfather, Eli, Cal. Yet here was June's handwriting covering decades of decisions. June had negotiated, refused offers, managed horses, protected boundaries, kept records. She had not simply lived here. She had run the place. The realization settled somewhere deep in Mara, quietly but firmly. Maybe inheriting responsibility did not mean becoming her father. Maybe there had always been more than one way to belong here. She closed the ledger when her stomach growled and looked toward the barn door. The mystery could wait. The horses could not. Outside, sunlight had softened the top layer of snow, but the damaged northern fence still sagged where the storm had hit it. Noah had helped secure the worst section, yet the temporary wire would not survive another hard wind. Mara checked the tool shed near the main barn and found the new posts Eli had ordered. There were enough to replace several broken sections, but buying more wire, feed, and repairs would soon become a problem. She counted the cash left in her wallet when she went inside the farmhouse for water. It was almost nothing. The $50 she had paid to return already felt reckless. Staying longer would cost more. She could not ask Noah to abandon his own family's work every day, and she could not stand in front of old papers while the ranch deteriorated around her. So Mara carried one post north herself. The ground was still hard beneath the snow. She dug until her shoulders burned, set the post, packed the soil and frozen gravel around it, then started on the next. Blue remained nearby, occasionally running toward the horses when they came too close. By the time Mara pulled the first strand of wire tight, her palms ached even through her gloves. She stepped back and looked at the repair. Crooked, but solid. Eli would have criticized the angle. He also would have used it. One, Mara said. The word vanished into the open pasture. It was not enough to save the ranch. It was only one post, but it was the first thing she had fixed here without her father standing beside her. Late that afternoon, she carried the ledger back to the hidden barn. She read more carefully now, searching for references to the north parcel. One entry mentioned a tax payment, another named a surveyor. Then, near the final third of the book, she found a sentence written larger than the surrounding notes. Original deed secured behind the bay. Copies may disappear. Memory may fail. Paper must remain. Mara frowned. Behind the bay. She read it aloud. Blue's ears twitched. Her first thought was geography. Maybe June had called part of the property a bay, though that made little sense in Wyoming. She checked the survey map for a place name and found nothing. When Noah arrived near sunset to check the fence repair, Mara showed him the line. He read it twice. Behind the bay, he said. You think it's a location I don't know? Noah glanced toward the saddle racks. June was a horsewoman. Mara followed his gaze. So bay is a color. Mara looked at him. A horse. Could be. They turned together toward the 6 saddles. Mara raised the lantern and moved down the row, studying brass plates. Worn leather and faded markings she had ignored before. June's saddle had no horse name. Eli's didn't either. The third had a cracked plate with lettering too worn to read. Mara moved to the 4th. Nothing. The 5th, then the 6th. A small brass plate was fixed beneath the cantle, tarnished almost black. Mara rubbed it with her thumb. Letters appeared beneath the grime. Bay Lady, 1978. Mara stared at the saddle as Blue came to stand beside her. June had written that the deed was behind the bay, and for the first time, Mara knew exactly where to look next. Mara waited until morning before touching the Bay Lady saddle. The hidden barn had gone cold overnight, and pale light slipped through the dusty windows as she set Eli's lantern on the workbench. Blue lay near the door, watching her. Noah stood beside the saddle rack with his arms folded against the chill. If June meant this one, Mara said, there should be something behind it. She lifted the saddle from the rack. The leather creaked in her hands. Noah helped her set it carefully on the workbench behind the rack. Mara found only old boards, dust, and a narrow rectangular panel fitted into the wall. Her pulse quickened. She worked her fingers along the edge until it loosened. This has to be it. Noah held the lantern closer. Mara pulled the panel free. A small cavity appeared behind it. Inside was one envelope, nothing else. Mara stared at it. That's not a deed. Open it. The envelope was brittle and sealed with a strip of yellowing tape. Mara eased it apart. Inside were property tax receipts folded into several bundles. She spread them across the workbench, one by one. Some were decades old, carrying June Bennett's name. Later ones listed Eli Bennett. The newest receipt was dated less than a year earlier. Mara read the line twice. North Parcel. Paid by Eli Bennett. Dad was still paying taxes on it? Noah leaned over her shoulder. Looks like it, after Cal says the ranch was already tied up in debt. Taxes don't prove ownership by themselves. No, Mara touched the newest receipt. But they proved Dad was treating this parcel like it mattered. The realization felt different from the clues before it. Eli had not merely kept an old family map or stored sentimental saddles. He had continued paying to preserve something legally separate. Mara checked the envelope again, hoping for another page. Empty. June wrote original deed secured behind the bay. She looked at the hollow wall. So where is it? Noah examined the panel. Maybe someone moved it. Mara immediately thought of Cal, then stopped herself. She had no proof. Or maybe we're still reading it wrong. Blue rose and stretched. Mara gathered the receipts and tucked them safely into the canvas bundle with the survey map. She was tired of finding half answers. Every clue seemed to open a door onto another locked room. By noon, she was sitting across from Walter Pierce in the back booth of a small diner near the county building. Ruth had arranged the meeting. Walter was nearly 70, thin, careful in his movements, with a face that looked permanently skeptical. He had worked as a county clerk before retiring years earlier. Mara placed a copy of the North parcel number in front of him. "Ruth says you might remember this." Walter adjusted his glasses. "I remember the Bennett name. Do you remember June Bennett?" He gave a short laugh. "Everybody who worked county records in those days remembered June. Why? Because she read everything before she signed it." Mara almost smiled. That sounded exactly like the woman she had begun to know through the ledger. Walter studied the parcel number. "This northern piece was separate. I remember that much. Separate from the ranch. Separate in the records. Who owned it after June?" Walter leaned back. "That's where my memory gets less useful." Mara's shoulders fell slightly. "But you remember something?" "I remember a transfer." He tapped one finger against the table. "June changed the structure of the property after her husband died. There had been arguments about whether the land should stay together or be divided. She wanted the core ground protected. The house, horse pasture, spring access. Maybe some of the northern acreage, too. I'd have to see the old documents." Mara exchanged a glance with Ruth. "Did she give it to my father?" Walter frowned, thinking, "I remember Eli being connected to it. More than that would be guessing." Mara hated the word guessing, but at least he wasn't pretending certainty. "Did Cal have any claim?" Walter looked at her carefully. "Not to everything. That much I can tell you." Mara leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means family ranches are rarely as simple as one fence around one owner. Different parcels, different interests, different transfers. Your uncle may have rights in some acreage. That does not automatically mean he controls all of it." Mara thought of Cal saying the ranch was sold as though every barn, pasture, and fence post had vanished in one transaction. "June wanted the core to go through Eli." Walter nodded slowly. "That is what I remember. She was very clear that the heart of Bennett Ranch was not to be bargained away because of another relative's decision." After Eli, Walter shook his head. "That part I won't swear to, not without records." It was not the answer Mara wanted, but it was enough to make the shape of the truth clearer. On the way back to the ranch, Noah drove while Mara sat with the folder on her lap. Blue occupied the back seat for several miles. Neither spoke. Then Noah said, "Suppose Walter's right." Mara looked at him. "About what?" "Suppose part of the ranch really is protected. Suppose it belongs to you." She watched snowy fields pass outside the window. "We don't know that." "I know. I'm asking, suppose—" Mara said nothing. Noah continued, "Would you stay?" The question irritated her because it was not about documents. "I'm trying to figure out whether Cal lied to me. That's not what I asked." "Then ask me later." "You don't have to answer me." "Good." Noah kept his eyes on the road. "I just think there's a difference between proving something is yours and deciding you want it." Mara turned toward the window. She knew he was right, which made the question worse. Before Eli died, she had won it out. She had imagined roads beyond Wyoming, towns where nobody knew the Bennett name, a life where every decision did not seem to come with 3 generations standing behind it. Now the thought of losing the ranch made something in her chest tighten. She did not know whether that was love, guilt, grief, or all 3. "I don't know what I want," she said finally. Noah nodded once. "That's fair." When they reached the farmhouse, an envelope had been wedged beneath the front door. Mara recognized Cal's handwriting immediately. Her name was written across the front. Inside was a formal notice telling her to vacate the property and remove her personal belongings. She read it once, then again. Noah watched her face. What is it? Mara handed him the page. He wants me out. The words made her angrier than the threat itself. Cal had already told her the ranch was gone. Now he was putting that version of reality on paper. Mara folded the notice carefully instead of tearing it. I'm not leaving today. Mara, I'm not saying forever. I'm saying not while I still don't know what Dad was trying to protect. Noah gave the paper back. Then keep every document. That evening, Mara spread the tax receipts, June's ledger, and Eli's survey across the kitchen table. The farmhouse felt strange with her sitting there alone, almost like the morning Cal had told her there was nothing left. Only now the table held evidence instead of explanations. Her phone rang shortly after dark. Walter Pierce. Mara answered immediately. Mr. Pierce, I remembered something. His voice sounded more alert than it had at the diner. After you left, I kept thinking about that old Bennett transfer. The county copied certain deed books to microfilm before the archive system changed. Mara stood. Where older storage reference? I know the series. Can we see it? Probably. Walter paused. But listen to me first. Mara gripped the phone tighter. Okay. Your uncle may have sold something. I'm not saying he didn't. Another pause. But Mara, your uncle didn't sell what he told you he sold. The next morning, Mara sat beside Ruth in the county records office while Walter Pierce stood behind them, one hand resting on the back of her chair. The microfilm reader hummed softly as another faded page appeared on the screen. Walter had found the old reference series exactly where he remembered it. For nearly an hour, they moved through transfers, surveys, and legal descriptions until Mara's eyes hurt from reading. Then Ruth touched the screen. There! The Bennett name appeared beside a transfer involving acreage west and south of the original ranch. Walter compared the description with Eli's survey. This is what I was remembering. Mara leaned closer. Cal sold this. There was a transaction involving these outside sections. Walter said, Your uncle appears to have had an interest he could deal with. Mara felt an uncomfortable shift inside her. Cal had not invented the sale entirely. So he was telling the truth. Part of it. Ruth said. Walter changed the image and placed Eli's survey beside the reader. Look at the legal descriptions. This transaction does not include the north parcel. And unless another document exists that we haven't found, it doesn't include the core property June separated either. Mara followed the boundary lines with her finger. The farmhouse, horse pasture, spring access, hidden barn. The places June's ledger had described as the heart of Bennett Ranch sat outside the acreage involved in the transaction Walter had found. So when Cal said the ranch was sold, he took something technically true, Ruth said, and let you believe something much bigger? Mara remembered sitting at the kitchen table after the funeral. The ranch couldn't carry it anymore. It was sold. Nothing worth taking. She had been too stunned to know which questions to ask. Cal had counted on that. Can this prove the north parcel is mine? She asked. Walter's expression tightened. Not yet. He brought up another record. We can show June held it separately. We can show your father continued paying taxes associated with it. We can show the acreage your uncle dealt with is not the same property described here. But the transfer we need, the document establishing how June's protected property passed forward, is missing from what we found. The deed. The deed. Or a sufficiently complete recorded copy. Mara thought of June's ledger. Original deed secured behind the bay. There was supposed to be one in the barn. Supposed to be, Ruth asked. Mara explained the line in June's ledger and the envelope of tax receipts they had found behind Bay Lady's saddle rack. Walter listened carefully. Then protect those receipts. They matter. But don't mistake them for the deed, Mara nodded. She was learning how exhausting truth could be when every answer required another piece of paper. By afternoon, she was back at Bennett Ranch. Cal's pickup was waiting beside the farmhouse. Mara stopped several yards away. Blue remained close to her leg. Cal stood on the porch holding the notice he had left the previous day. "You ignored this." "I read it." "Then why are you still here?" "Because you lied to me." Cal's face hardened. "I'm not doing this again." "Yes, you are." Mara took Eli's survey from her coat, but did not hand it over. "You sold acreage. You didn't sell all of Bennett Ranch." Cal looked at the map, then away. That was enough. "You knew," Mara said. "You knew there were separate parcels." "Of course I knew. I grew up here. Then why tell me everything was gone?" "Because for practical purposes it is. That isn't an answer." Cal stepped down from the porch. "You want an answer? Fine. This place has been bleeding money for years. Your father kept holding on because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Somebody had to make decisions. They weren't yours to make. Some of them were, not the north parcel." Cal's jaw tightened. "You don't know who owns that land." "Neither do you, apparently. Otherwise, you wouldn't care what I found." He stared at her. Mara felt fear beneath her anger, but she did not move. "Why didn't you tell me there was a question about the title?" she asked. "Because there shouldn't have been a question. Old family paperwork doesn't magically make you capable of running a ranch." The words struck harder than she expected. "This isn't about whether I'm capable, isn't it?" Cal pointed toward the pasture. "You wanted to leave, Mara. Everybody knew it. Eli knew it. You spent years talking about getting out of Wyoming." So he was still determined to leave the heart of this place to you. The sentence hung between them. Cal seemed to realize how much he had said, but this time he did not retreat. "I worked here before you were born," he continued. "I fixed fences, put up hay, sat through bad winters. Then I watched your father treat the ranch like it belonged to one line of the family and nobody else mattered. You left, after years of being told Eli always knew best, and that gave you the right to decide for me? I thought you'd take the chance to walk away. It was what you said you wanted." Mara felt the old guilt rise up. The argument with Eli, the sentence she wished she could erase, for a moment Cal's reasoning found the most vulnerable place in her. Then she remembered the unfinished letter. "If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to explain." She remembered Noah telling her Eli had asked for help if she ever came back. Her father had known she might leave. That did not mean Cal had been entitled to erase her choice. "Maybe I would have left," Mara said. "Maybe I still will, someday." Cal frowned. "Then what are you fighting for?" "The right to decide that myself." He said nothing. Mara stepped closer. "You didn't get to decide whether I deserved the choice." Cal looked suddenly older than he had at the funeral. "You think finding a few old papers changes what this place costs to keep alive? Know when to feed alone." "I know what feed costs." "Then act like it." "I am." Mara folded the survey. "I'm finding out what Dad was trying to protect." Cal looked at her for several seconds, then walked toward his truck. He stopped before opening the door. "Old deeds don't fix broken fences. Neither do lies." Cal drove away without answering. Mara stood in the cold until the sound of his engine disappeared. Blue nudged her hand. That evening, she returned to the hidden barn alone. She spread June's ledger beside Bay Lady's saddle. The empty wall cavity mocked her. She read the sentence again. "Original deed secured behind the bay. Copies may disappear. Memory may fail. Paper must remain behind the bay." Mara whispered. They had assumed June meant behind Bay Lady's rack because that was where the envelope had been.
but June had not written behind the baize rack. Mara looked at the saddle itself. She lifted it onto the workbench and turned it carefully. The underside was lined with old leather, darkened by age. Near the rear edge, most of the stitching was neat and evenly spaced. One section was not. Mara brought the lantern closer. Several inches of thread had been sewn by hand in a slightly different color. Her heartbeat quickened. No way. She pressed the leather. Something beneath it gave with a faint, dry crackle. Not wood. Not padding. Paper. Mara took Eli's pocket knife from the workbench, slid the tip beneath the first uneven stitch, and felt it touch something hidden under the lining. Mara held the knife perfectly still. The hidden layer beneath Bay Lady's saddle lining made another faint crackling sound when she pressed it. Paper. For several seconds, she could hear only her own breathing and Blue shifting near the barn door. Then she carefully cut one stitch, then another, working slowly so the blade would not touch whatever June had hidden inside. The old thread loosened. Mara peeled back the leather lining. Beneath it lay a narrow packet wrapped in dark oilcloth. Her hands began to shake before she even removed it. "You were right," she whispered, though she did not know whether she was speaking to June, Eli, or herself. The packet was flatter than she expected, protected by folded cloth and waxed string. Mara carried it to the workbench and set it beneath the lantern. She untied the string carefully. Inside were several documents, yellowed but dry. The first was a deed. Mara recognized the property description immediately because she had spent days staring at the same parcel numbers: North Parcel, the farmhouse acreage, horse pasture, spring access, the hidden barn. She followed the legal language line by line, barely breathing. June Bennett's name appeared first, then Eli Bennett's. Beneath that transfer was a provision describing succession after Eli's death. Mara read the same sentence 3 times before she trusted herself to understand it. The property was to pass to Eli Bennett's sole surviving child, Mara Bennett. She sat down hard on the workbench stool. Blue came to her immediately, pressing against her knee. Mara put one hand on his back while staring at her own name. "It's mine." The words sounded impossible in the empty barn, not because she had wanted the ranch. A week earlier, she had believed there was nothing left. Cal had said it so calmly that she had almost accepted it as fact. Nothing worth taking. Yet June had protected the heart of Bennett Ranch decades ago, and Eli had maintained that protection until his death. Mara lifted the next document. It was a notarized transfer confirming the same property description. Another sheet carried an older survey reference that matched Walter's microfilm records. A property tax statement matched the receipts they had already found. The pieces finally aligned. These were not random family papers. They were the chain Walter had said they needed. Mara took out her phone, photographed every page, then wrapped the originals again. She did not want to carry them unprotected any longer than necessary. When she lifted the final sheet, something else slid free from the packet. Folded stationery. Her name was written across the outside in Eli's handwriting. Mara froze. The first page of his unfinished letter was already inside her coat. "If you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to explain." She unfolded the new pages. The handwriting began mid-thought. "I know you think I was disappointed when you said you wanted to leave." Mara stopped reading. Her throat tightened. She sat down again. The barn blurred around her, and for a moment she was back in the farmhouse kitchen during their last argument, hearing herself say, "I don't want this place to become my whole life." She forced herself to continue. "I wasn't disappointed. I was scared I had made you believe staying here was the only way to love this family. It isn't. The ranch was never supposed to be a chain.
Your grandmother understood that better than anyone. She protected this ground so no one could take the choice away from the next person. If you want college, go. If you want another state, go. If you want a life that has nothing to do with horses, build it. I only wanted you to have a place you could come home to because you choose it, not because you owe it anything. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. The tears came before she could stop them. For days, she had been fighting to understand property lines, deeds, taxes, and Cal's lies. None of that hurt as much as realizing she had carried the wrong version of her father's last feelings. Eli had not died believing she rejected him. He had heard her. More importantly, he had understood her. The letter continued. There are things about the property Cal will disagree with. He has his reasons, and some of them come from old hurt. But that does not give him the right to decide for you. The papers with this letter are the originals June protected. Keep them safe. Check them against the county records. Make your own decision after you know the truth. Mara lowered the page. Blue rested his chin on her boot. She laughed once through tears and wiped her face with her sleeve. He knew. The barn no longer felt hidden. It felt like a message waiting for the right moment to be opened. Within an hour, Mara had Ruth, Walter, and Noah gathered around the kitchen table at the farmhouse. She placed photocopies in front of them while the original packet remained wrapped in oilcloth beside her. Walter studied the deed slowly, using a magnifying glass for several lines. He compared parcel numbers with his notes from the county archive. "This is it," he said at last. Mara leaned forward. "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough to say the north parcel and the core property were not part of the transaction your uncle described to you." He tapped the succession language. "And this provision is very clear." Ruth looked at Mara. "June to Eli, Eli to his child, me." Mara said. Walter nodded. "You—" Noah let out a breath and sat back. Mara expected triumph. Instead, she felt strangely quiet. The truth was larger than winning an argument with Cal. The land had been hers while she packed her duffel bag, believing she had nowhere to go. It had been hers while she paid $50 for a ride just to see it one last time. It had been hers while Cal told her to stop digging through things that did not belong to her. Cal arrived before sunset, after Mara called him and told him simply that she had found the original deed. He entered the farmhouse without removing his coat. When he saw Walter at the table, his face changed. Mara placed a copy of the deed in front of him, read it. Cal did not sit. He scanned the first page, then the second. His expression tightened. Where was this in the barn? Where in the barn? That doesn't matter, Cal read farther. Mara watched the moment he reached her name. His shoulders lowered slightly. You knew there was a title problem, Mara said. He did not deny it. I knew June had separated land. You knew Dad believed it would come to me. Silence, Cal. Yes, the word was quiet. Ruth looked away. Mara felt anger rise, but not the wild anger she had expected. It was cleaner now. So you told me the ranch was sold because you thought I'd leave. Cal stared at the deed. I sold what I could legally deal with, the outer acreage, interests that were mine to handle, and you let me think that included everything? I thought it was better than watching this place fall apart. Better for who? Cal finally looked at her. You wanted out. That was my choice. You're 18. I was 18 when you decided I deserved nothing. He flinched, though only slightly. I worked here half my life before I left. Eli always acted like this place belonged to him alone. Then he planned to hand the heart of it to someone who spent years saying she didn't want it. Mara thought of the letter inside her pocket. Dad knew I might leave. Then why protect it for you? Because he wanted me to choose. Cal's face hardened again. But the argument had gone out of him. Walter folded his hands on the table. The documents can be verified against the county records. Whatever happens with the outside acreage, this core parcel is separate. Cal looked toward the window. Beyond it, the repaired section of northern fence cut a dark line across the snow. "You think a deed makes this easy?" he asked. "No," Mara said. "I know it doesn't. Feed costs money. Fence costs money. Winter doesn't care whose name is on paper. I know that too." Cal picked up the copy, then set it down. "Then you'd better decide what you're actually fighting for." He left without another word. After the truck disappeared, Ruth poured coffee nobody had asked for. Walter gathered his notes. Noah stood near the window. Mara remained at the table with Eli's letter in front of her. The ranch was hers, but outside, broken fencing still needed replacing. The horses still needed feed. The buildings still needed work. Her wallet was nearly empty. Ownership had answered the mystery, but it had not solved the life waiting beyond it. Ruth set a mug beside Mara and rested one hand on the back of the chair. "So what are you going to do with it?" Mara did not answer Ruth that night. She carried Eli's letter upstairs, placed the original deed inside the old desk drawer where his property papers had once been, and sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the wind move around the farmhouse. The ranch was hers. The sentence still felt too large to hold. By morning it felt smaller and more practical. Ownership meant feed bills, frozen water lines, broken posts, roof repairs, and horses that did not care about family history. Mara went outside before sunrise and walked the northern fence with Blue. The temporary repairs had held, but 3 more posts leaned badly. She counted them, wrote the number on the back of an old feed receipt, then checked the hay supply in the main barn. Not enough for the entire winter. When Ruth arrived later with coffee and a list of names, Mara was sitting on an overturned bucket doing figures with a pencil. "You look disappointed," Ruth said. "I'm calculating how fast I can go broke." Ruth handed her a cup. "That means you're thinking like an owner." Mara looked at the list. "What's this people who knew your father? People your family helped over the years. People who might be willing to help you now." Mara shook her head immediately. "I don't want charity." "Good. Most of them don't offer charity." Ruth pointed at the first name. "Tom Keller needs 2 horses boarded through winter. Pays monthly. The Carsons need a young gelding started in spring. Pays better. Noah's father knows someone selling hay at a fair price if you take the damaged outer bales too." Mara read the list again, more slowly. "You already called people. I made inquiries without asking me." Ruth smiled faintly. "June would have liked you over the next several days." Bennett Ranch stopped feeling like a courtroom and started feeling like work. Noah came over after finishing chores at his family's place and helped Mara replace the worst northern posts. 2 neighboring ranchers arrived the following Saturday with a post driver and extra wire. One of them, a broad-shouldered man Mara had known since childhood, shrugged when she tried to thank him. "Your dad pulled 3 calves out of a spring flood for me 10 years ago. Your grandma brought feed when my father was sick." "We're even?" "That doesn't sound even. Then help somebody else someday." Mara stopped arguing. They rebuilt the fence section by section. The clean line of new posts slowly replaced the sagging wire that had nearly failed in the blizzard. Mara worked until her shoulders ached. Every time she looked up, Blue was somewhere nearby, watching the pasture as if supervising all of them. The outer acreage Cal had sold remained a separate matter, but the legal review confirmed that the core ranch, including the farmhouse, horse pasture, spring access, and north barn, belonged to Mara under the Bennett transfer documents. The obligations tied to the outer land were handled through the arrangement already underway, leaving Mara with no miraculous fortune and no pile of easy money. What she had was land, buildings, horses, work,
and just enough room to build something if she was careful. Cal came back once. He parked beside the farmhouse and stood at the gate while Mara was unloading hay. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Walter says the county accepted the deed chain," he said. "Yes." "So that's done." "Yes." Cal looked toward the northern pasture. "You replaced the fence. Most of it. Post spacing is too wide near the corner." Mara nearly smiled despite herself. "Noah said the same thing." Cal shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "Good," he nodded. "I thought I was saving you from something you'd regret." "You were deciding for me." "I know." It was the closest thing to an admission Mara expected. She did not invite him inside. She did not tell him everything was fine. "You don't get to make decisions about this place anymore," she said. "Or about me." Cal looked at her for several seconds, then nodded once. "Understood." He left without another argument. Mara watched the truck disappear down the road and felt no triumph. Only space. Space where his voice had been telling her what was gone, what she deserved, what she was capable of. That space belonged to her now, too. Winter settled over Wyoming, hard and bright. Mara took in the 2 boarding horses Ruth had mentioned and began working the gelding arrangement for spring. The money was modest, but it covered feed better than hope alone. She kept records the way June had, though her handwriting was messier. Some evenings, she studied the old ledger beside her own notebook, comparing fencing costs separated by decades. Other nights, she read Eli's letter again. The line that stayed with her was not about ownership. It was the simplest one. The ranch was never supposed to be a chain. She began restoring the hidden barn after the worst cold passed. Noah helped replace 2 rotten boards, but Mara cleaned most of it herself. She brushed dust from the saddle racks, conditioned the leather, repaired torn canvas covers, and hung each saddle carefully in its old place. The barn became less of a hiding place and more of a family room built out of wood, leather, and memory. She still did not know every story behind every saddle, but she no longer felt threatened by what she did not know. The histories would come in time. When she reached the saddle marked M.B., she finally examined it closely. Inside an old storage sleeve beneath the rack, she found a faded tag identifying its original owner, Margaret Bennett, Mara's great-grandmother. The initials had never been meant for Mara. That made sense. Then she noticed a smaller scrap of paper folded beneath the tag. Eli's handwriting. "Maybe she'll use it someday." Mara sat on the floor and laughed softly. Blue raised his head from the doorway. "He really planned everything except explaining it on time." Blue thumped his tail. Mara kept the saddle. She did not treat it like a prophecy. She simply cleaned it and returned it to the rack. By early spring, the snow pulled back from the lower fields, water moved again through the creek, and the repaired northern fence stood dark against the pale grass. Mara had made a decision, though not the kind everyone expected. She would give herself 1 full year to restore the ranch, build the boarding and training work carefully, and see whether Bennett Ranch could support itself without swallowing her life. After that, she could still go to school. She could still leave Wyoming. She could still come back. For the first time. None of those choices felt like betrayal. One morning, she saddled a mare and rode north with Blue following along the fence line. They climbed the same ridge she had crossed during the blizzard months earlier. Then, the world had been white and blind, and she had been following paw prints towards something she did not understand. Now the sky was clear. Below her, the hidden barn stood open to the sun. Beyond it stretched the pasture, farmhouse, spring ground, and repaired fences of Bennett Ranch. Mara stopped the mare at the top of the ridge. She remembered paying $50 just to come back and see the place one last time.
She had arrived believing it belonged to someone else. She had believed her father died leaving her nothing. She had believed her final angry words had been the last thing he understood about her. All three beliefs had been wrong. Blue sat beside the mare, tongue hanging slightly from his mouth. Mara looked over the land for a long time. "I'm staying," she said. Then she smiled. For now. That mattered. She was not promising the ranch her whole life. She was choosing it today. Below her, the north barn doors stood open, the saddles inside catching the morning light. The deed had proven the ranch was hers. Eli's letter had given her something harder to inherit and easier to lose permission to become whoever she wanted without surrendering where she came from. Mara turned the mare toward home. For years, she had believed Bennett Ranch was a place she would someday have to escape. Now she understood what her father had actually left her. Not an obligation, not a chain. A place she could leave, a place she could return to, and a life that was finally hers to choose.